Fine, good. Welcome, everybody. Nice to see you again. Um, we are coming to our last lap. I'm going to just read um, the Bible passage that relates to today. I'm reading from Mark 15 from verse 42. It was the day before the Sabbath. The day was called Preparation Day. As evening approached, Joseph went boldly to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Joseph was from the town of Arimathea, and he was the leading member of the Jewish council. He was waiting for God's kingdom. Pilate was surprised to hear that Jesus was already dead, so he called for the Roman commander. He asked him if Jesus had already died. The commander said it was true, so Pilate gave the body to Joseph. And Joseph bought some linen cloth. He took down the body and wrapped it in the linen. He put it in a tomb cut out of rock. Then he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where Jesus' body had been placed. And a prayer. Lord Jesus, Lord of life, you became as nothing for us. Be with all who feel worthless and as nothing in the world's eyes. You were laid in a cold, dark tomb and hidden from sight. Be with all who suffer and die in secret, hidden from the eyes of the world. To you, Jesus, your rigid body imprisoned in a tomb, be honour and glory with the Father and the Son, now and forever. Amen. We're going to look at two parts tonight. We're looking at what's generally scientifically or theologically called the deposition, the taking down from the cross, and then the entombment or the placing of the body for burial. And the first part I've actually divided into two. You will note in that reading that Mary, the mother of Jesus, doesn't really get a mention. There are other Marys present at the end there, but Mary is part of this section and is often part of the Stations of the Cross. And then the second part is to do with other people being involved in the taking down. And that's really where the story that I've read comes in. Though, interestingly, I think few, if hardly any, of the images that we're going to see particularly show Joseph of Arimathea. There are general people there, but considering that Joseph is a major player in the Bible stories, he actually doesn't hardly appear within any of the pictures. They will play Spot the Joseph. So if you spot Joseph, you can give me a wave, a bit like Where's Wally? I wanted to start with this, which is not in the sequence, but is in the Methodist Art Collection. Graham Sutherland, the great artist of the middle and later part of the 20th century. And this is, as you see, simply called The Deposition. And has always struck me as an incredibly stark image. It's trying to do, I think, in a symbolic way, what we will see later on in more literal ways. So there is the body of Jesus. If he's going to fit into that tomb, then he's going to have to be a bit of a squash at the bottom. But I think the idea is that you're just looking at the emaciated body and the gentle lowering down. There are, if you look on the left and the right, there are other people present, but they're hardly there. There is the empty cross behind. But that itself has got some of the other linens showing. So it's kind of a bit like when we have the cross during Lent for the liturgy, and particularly on Easter Day with the grave clothes draped over them. But this is one of the four Frank Roper's. You will remember that I said that Frank Roper's work was in the Methodist Art Collection as well, and there are just four of the Stations of the Cross. And so this is a metal casting. And again, you've got the drapes, the linen. They're almost using it to gently lower the body. And certainly this man on the ladder is pulling against the linen in order to get himself down safely. I always think it's interesting that when they raise the cross, it goes from the horizontal to the vertical. But I think almost without exception this evening, you'll see that the cross is in the vertical and Jesus is taken down from it, which must have been an incredibly awkward and difficult thing to achieve. Yes, you've got a dead body, so literally and figuratively, it's a dead weight. But you do have to ask questions about how they got nails out and were they really being as reverent with the body as they could have been. But I've never seen anything in any of these that kind of identifies that one of these is Joseph. I think I did show this probably last year or possibly the year before. William Roberts, part of that early 20th century British art movement, along with people like Stanley Spencer. It's a very angular piece. I mean, it's obviously slightly influenced by Cubism and even brutalism. I think what's most interesting in it for me is how many people are involved, and they are seemingly all men except for, I presume, this person here in the blue is supposed to be Mary, blue top and a red bottom. So quite why she's wearing a hard hat, I'm not entirely sure, because it's not a normal headgear of the time. I mean, in some ways, I think it's a more realistic impression because it would have taken a fair number of people to be involved. And you can still see in the background over here, one could say one of the two thieves is still hanging on the cross. And there's on this side, then there are more ladders coming, and I think there's supposed to be another cross behind. You can just make out a head and an arm. But it's again, as we've seen in many of the pictures of that era, highly exaggerated hands and feet, so that the hands are busy and taking the weight. And I think interesting for something that's dated 1926, that you have two black people as well as very obvious white people within the picture. And then another woman over here who is weeping and wailing. I don't know. What do you make of that? What do you think of that as an image?
It looks it's quite chaotic and busy.
Yeah.
And not as sort of reverent as the other ones that you've shown us.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yes, and I think you get the impression in the Bible reading, well, it's the end of the day and everybody's gone home and Joseph has gone back, but there's no reason for that to be true. And, if there were other people hanging there, surely there were other family around. Would the crowd have gone home by this stage? I mean, it's dark in this picture, so has night fallen? Yeah, kind of would have been chaotic, and particularly if we think about it being Passover festival, it was the need to get everything finished before the time. Well, it would have been before sundown actually, to get the body down and put into a tomb before we got into the night and into the festival season.
We've just been trying to work out where Jesus's head is, and we think we've found it. And he has a head covering the same as the women, or a head covering.
Let me expand it. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's here.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
And I think, is it a hint of a halo?
Maybe.
And then there's, yes, you've got a red cap. I mean, it's interesting because this woman, it's more like a cap, whereas this woman seems to have a brim.
Yeah, yeah.
Could that be Joseph in the pinky orangey, the beard? So he looks sort of a bit more,
Oh, an older person, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah,
less like the workman, doesn't he?
yeah, he does. Yes. I think the problem with looking for Joseph is there are no distinguishing iconic features. You know, Mary will be dressed in blue or red. Um, you know, the people who are holy have got a halo, so you get the clues from the image. But there's nothing, as far as I know, about Joseph that's embedded in art for us to identify who he is. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if any of you have been to the Oberammergau Passion Play. I haven't, but I just thought it was interesting to see how, in an artistic way, they portrayed this. So again, you've got a ladder, you've got the physicality. I mean, they are actually taking the actor Jesus down from the cross. I'm sorry, it's a bit dark. It's a bit darker than I thought it would be. But you know, those people are really bearing the weight, and it must be a real moment for both the people involved. I mean, I just can't imagine playing Jesus or even playing Joseph as part of this, as well as sort of witnessing it happening live. I know it's a performance and it's surrounded by singing and so on, but it must be quite an affecting moment to see that happen. And of course, Jesus has got to play dead in order to have a sort of rigid body rather than in any way assisting him coming down from the cross. I was interested by the light which is coming from above. There's all the light is vertically above. It's almost as if the light of God is shining down upon the scene. Ilaria Clark, interestingly, again, doesn't particularly pick out who people are. Jesus is being let down by a person who is up the ladder. Could they hold the body of Jesus just like that under the arms? And then the welcoming arms below. If I mean, one assumes that this is Mary. The blue would indicate that that's so, and maybe this is Mary Magdalene in the red, the traditional images for them. So the women are present, but again, unless it's Joseph who's up the ladder. I do love. I remember I've always said, look at Eulalia Clark's feet. I do love the feet on the ladder. You know, she has taken trouble to paint that foot actually on the rung of a ladder and to show you what's going on. I think that's a very clever image. It would have been so easy just to paint that as a flat foot.
I find it strange that, considering all the violence and awfulness that's gone before, how reverent they are at this time. I mean, you'd have thought that he'd just cut the bindings and just pulled him down, and the Romans would have just dropped him on the floor. You know, and yet you've got this sort of real gentleness and
I think, I think that's right, Graham. But I think that's hinted at in the gospel accounts. So you have the conversation about, are they going to break the legs? Well, no, you don't need to break the legs because he is already dead. And Joseph going to ask for the body. I mean, my guess is that the two thieves on either side probably were just cut down. They were nothing. They were, insignificant and unimportant. So in a way, I think the Bible gives the hint that it was done in a reverent way. The fact that a religious person in Joseph, I mean, it's not even, it's not the disciples because they aren't around. The women aren't able to do it. Or at least one would presume that they hadn't got the strength to do it if Mary is as old as we think she might be. So maybe, part of the Bible story is that there were people there for Jesus at and beyond the end. Yeah. Well, I suppose in a way it's that switching moment, isn't it? Even at the moment of death, you get a change um, from violence to glory, if you like. I was speaking yesterday in my sermon about John's use of the word lifted up, and that John's use of that word is both you have to lift the cross in order for the death to occur. That's what causes the asphyxiation and the body to drop. But John is saying at that moment, it becomes the glorious moment of victory. So in a sense, even on the cross, in the moment of death, that change from violence to peace for the world, if you like, has come about. Grateful to Janice for sending this one on to me. I haven't used Heike's work, but you saw some of his work around Advent. Chinese painter now living and working, I think, in America. Interestingly, most of his artwork is much more angular. I've not seen any of his very recent work, and I think I'm right in saying that this was only been done this year, or it was only posted this year. I don't know, Janice, where did you come across it?
It appeared, I think it was on one of the Methodist Facebook pages,
All right.
but then I tried to find it again and I couldn't.
All right. No, I did find it outside of what you sent me.
Yeah.
But very often he has very angular, very geometric shapes forming even the people. And he's obviously moved a little way away from that to something a bit more, well, it's not realistic in one way, is it? But it's more looking like people with normal curves. Again, Mary on the bottom left here, and Mary Magdalene in red would be on the right. Hard to identify whether any of these is Joseph of Arimathea. I wondered how much he was influenced by Chinese costume. They always, they're always wearing bandanas or something similar, aren't they? And interestingly, I don't know if you, let me just bring it up a bit more. The crown of thorns has become the crown of glory, if you see. So the halo and the crown of thorns is now integrated together. And he does call it deposition rather than taking down. I haven't used Jonathan Hutchins' work. He is an artist working contemporarily in London, and a couple of years he has provided Stations of the Cross for two different churches, one in Harrow and one in Pinner. The background being that his wife died, and then he wanted to do something in remembrance, in tribute to her. Let me just find the right piece of paper. And so he has painted these series. The interesting thing, I think, is the brightness of them. If you want to see the full set, they are, if you look up Jonathan Hutchins online in Stations of the Cross, they are shown in a number of London online information. No, I can't put my hand on it. I've not shown some of the earlier ones because I struggled a bit as to the brightness of them. But the reason I put this one in is because I think this is the one picture that very definitely shows of Joseph of Arimathea. I think the elder man at the back with the beard and a skull cap is, for me, Joseph being part of that deposition. I say they're almost too garish for me, I think. And then Seeger or Simon Coda. We've looked at some of his images, and everybody's got a piece of the action here. So Jesus with the crown of thorns being brought down. Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of Jesus in the red and the blue. A soldier, maybe Joseph is this character here with the but there's also people behind sort of looking on and going ooh and ah, but it's taking a lot of people to do the heavy lifting, and I'm not entirely sure whose hand this is. This was the one I was struggling to understand. So it's reaching out to touch the hand of Jesus. I almost wondered if it was one of the thieves, but it's almost as if the hand has been bandaged and in being brought back. And we're just again at that moment of the eclipse, which was an image that we saw in Coda's work last week. You might just pick up, there are some Hebrew letters on either side. I don't know what they say. And it's as if this is the tearing of the cloth. So there's a rent in space, or there's a rent in the fabric being shown, and we're looking through it. But he pictures this in two different ways. So that was the first one, obviously deposition, and then he's helping me to transfer into the second part of this story, which is Jesus held by his mother, of which there is no account directly. I mean, we know from the account in the gospel that Mary was present, but there is no account in any of the four gospels or any of the other early Christian writings that says that Mary at any point held her son. I think in part it's recreating the Madonna and child pose, if you like. So, she held him at birth, and now she holds him in death. And in some ways, this has become even more a regular image used by artists. So you can see some of the links between the two images. But particularly, we've got skulls in the background here. But we're into very much into the tenderness now. So having got Jesus down from the cross, then Mary takes him into her arms, embraces him with love. And the second series of pictures we're going to look at for this station will be the ones that show this. I mean, this one is in the Methodist Art Collection, Elizabeth Frink's Pieta. Pieta being the word that's used for depicting this moment in time. But you can't actually see Jesus at all. Sorry, you can't see Mary at all. You can see Jesus, but Mary is not there, only that you imagine that his body is being held up. I've looked at this a number of times over the years, and I keep trying to work out exactly what Elizabeth Frink is trying to say in it and through it. I mean, it is a drawing, so it may be that this was part of a sketch before she went on to do other things and a more direct Pieta, or is it about her or us holding the body? The arm up on the right hand, sorry, left as we look, the right arm is part, I think, of the bringing down from the cross, is part of the gentle lowering. But it's certainly in the tradition of this notion of Mary holding and embracing her son. So I'm going to move on to some of the pictures, the series that we've been looking at right through. Margaret Adams Parker, the Pieta, Jesus' body is laid in his mother's arms. If you remember from the other images of hers, they are very muscular, but you can see the wasting of Jesus's body. And it's interesting, one presumes, that at 33 and somebody who had walked around a lot, Jesus was quite a, I don't know, athletic, fit. Certainly, I've no reason to think that Jesus was ill, but it's almost as if in dying, his body becomes emaciated. I mean, think back to that first image from Sutherland, and there's no flesh on the bone at all. And it's that way of depicting the dying through the image of what the body looks like. But there's no reason why Jesus should look any different now than he did 3 hours before when he's being put up on the cross. But traditionally, you get a much more emaciated body. Yes, I mean, any dead body will look different from a live body. There will be some wasting, and you can ask all sorts of questions about rigor mortis and so on. And maybe Graham or others with a medical background, Helen perhaps, can tell me more of what a dead body looks like and what happens in that. But we're only talking about, hours in totality. And I just find it interesting that the artists think it's right to go from what should have been quite a fit Jesus to an emaciated corpse.
I think the whiteness of the colour of the body is more indicative of dying, because I mean, in that, because I mean, we're just sort of looking at a body just literally minutes really after it's died, and it's not changed apart from the fact that the colour's changed.
Yes, as the blood stops pumping and it will drain away a bit. Thank you. I do appreciate Margaret Parker's work, because I think she shows rightly an older woman in Mary. I think sometimes, even if I just whip back to the coda, she's still a young woman. I mean, she could be the same age as her son, whereas here I think we have a woman, an older woman in grief. I think this is a much more.
You want to be very old.
Sorry.
She can't have been very old, can she? Because she was always called a young woman.
Yes.
Nativity.
Yes, but if Jesus is 33 and she was 16, so she's knocking 50. And I know that's not old. I'm looking very carefully around the room, but I wouldn't expect her to look the same age as Jesus. That's the point I'm making, even if she was only 16 years older. And if, as we think, she followed him around a bit, I mean, she would have been weather beaten and so on as her son was. So I'm not trying to be ageist about these things, but you hear what I'm saying. The quote is because, as I've said before, these works have been taken and used by the Church of Scotland, picked up by the Methodist Church and the United Reformed Church. Interestingly, the United Reformed Church devotions for this week and next week are following this series that were written for the Church of Scotland, based around the Mothers of Gaza. But the quote that's given for today is from Jeremiah. The Lord says, "A sound is heard in Ramah, the sound of bitter weeping. Rachel is crying for her children, they are gone, and she refuses to be comforted." And it's a stark reading from the Jeremiah period, when the people are being taken into exile in Babylon, but it's picked up within the Jesus New Testament story, and has been very much applied to the current plight of the Palestinians as well. So there is almost a direct link between Rachel, Mary, and the mothers of today. His Capart's done what he's done in some of his later paintings, which is to put a bigger crowd in behind, and you've got a hint of new life coming with the I don't know whether it's vines or whatever you might call it, growing, the new growth coming around. I think it's interesting the way that he's used the shape. I mean, the two body is close together and the two arms enfolded, is almost like a tomb entrance. So it's beginning to sort of prefigure the roundness of the tomb, the roundness of the stone that we're going to see later on. The Benedictine sisters, again, it's a very clear, direct line between one image and the next. So the Christ that we saw crucified last week is now very much the Christ who is taken down. And I think, again, in this image, you can pick out, well, I don't know which one it is, but one of those, probably the lower one, is going to be Joseph of Arimathea. And again, a tenderness to pick up Graham's word about the bringing down. And then the African image that I've been using, and I think it's interesting. We obviously have Mary and the two Marys on this side, and the men taking the body down, and I think you can feel the weight. I mean, the bend of the back is about taking the weight of the body. I'm intrigued by what Mary is doing, why her arms are sort of up above her head. I don't know whether that's a symbol of wailing or of being, it's a cultural sign or symbol, I don't know.
But her right arm looks out of sync.
Yeah, it does. It does slightly, yes. Yeah. Sorry, Janice, I hadn't seen you had disappeared. Waiting to come back.
It's okay. I put the plug in at the wall, but didn't turn it on.
Ah, that's a good reason for disappearing.
Thank you for connecting us again.
I think the most interesting thing about this image is the use of the purples, the darker shades. It's about time, so we're going into the evening. It's about death, so we're going into morning. Mourning. So yeah, I do worry about the man's feet on the ladder. I've got a whole feeling he's going to slip through the rungs and disappear. But, that's just me doing the health and safety. Please make sure somebody is holding a ladder while you climb it.
It looks as if it's going to slide sideways anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, that classic thing, slowly disappearing off stage left. This is one of the Smithsonian images. So remember, I've shown you these pictures that are from the Stations of the Cross trail, but not actually Stations of the Cross. And there are two pictures. So if you're struggling to see one, there's a slightly different coloured one coming up in a minute. But Lamentation, a black Afro-American artist, which is why we've got the Afro-American style clothing. Interestingly, all the women have got halos, so not just Mary, the mother. And interestingly, there's roughly the same image of Mary with her hands above her head. I mean, the other two are more in supplication, perhaps even in prayer. But I do wonder whether it is an African wailing image or lamentation image. I don't know. I'll just flick to the second one. They are two different pictures, but they're very much in the same style. And if you look closely, the hands are still up and over the head here. The two, it's more clear on this, the two thieves are still on the cross on either side. They are there in this, but all you can really see is their loincloths because they fade into the darkness of the night. I've got a feeling that this is the actual image, and the other picture, that this picture is a more stylized, or might even be a CGI version of it in order to bring out the relevant images. Then we return to our sequence from before. I mean, talking about tenderness, this one has always felt so affecting to me. Mary sitting on the ground with her son's body, well, almost draped across her. If I just emphasize the picture a bit more, I love the way her one hand is on his head, soothing his brow, and the other arm is under his body, holding the weight. So obviously the weight is on her knee and across her lap, but this hand, I mean, the skill of the carver to create this, I think, is quite remarkable. You see it's a little more clearly from above. And the sense of perspective, this hand again is quite large because it's nearer the view of the person. I mean, you put this hand against Mary's smaller hand, it's quite a stark contrast. From the Lincoln Cathedral set, the forest stations, very simplified, incredibly simplified image. Oh, I thought I'd got done an image. So let me bring it up. So Mary's head is here, but basically this is her hair going across her shoulders. Here is Mary's arm coming down, and all we can see of Jesus is his arm coming up. And I just love the way he's used the wood to almost show the muscle definition of the arm. And I think, I can't remember from seeing it in reality, I think this is an actual nail there. So the hand has still got the nail embedded in it. And interestingly called, the body is held by his mother. From Minster, the other cathedral, the taking down of the body, the women looking on at the back, and then presumably Joseph of Arimathea here carrying the body down. And they've really got the sense of the cross being at the top of the hill, and then the body is going down to where the tomb is. I mean, it's interesting in different images whether one person is carrying the body. Very often you see the body like on a stretcher with two people carrying, or just one using their under the arms and one carrying the legs. But there are very few images of it just one person doing it. And for those who were here last week, Michael Kenny, remember his image of Christ on the cross was after Michelangelo. And this one of Jesus taken down from the cross again is after Michelangelo. So it's Michelangelo's Pieta of Mary embracing her son. And then a few from one or two other artists that we've looked at before. Dinah Rowe Kendall, you will know, is one of my favourite artists of more recent times, still at work, though now in her later life. And interestingly, it's the perspective of this one that's interesting. So we're looking from really low down up through the cross into the heavens. The sun has come out again, but it's night is gathering. You've got the whole crowd, most of whom are women. If I just bring this up, I think most of these are women who are coming close to see what's going on. And then this older character, at least if I dare say that in the company of what I said earlier about age. A balding man, I mean, these days, balding men start at 20, as far as I can see. But balding man, presumably, is Joseph of Arimathea, and taking Jesus. And I just love the cloth that they're going to wrap him in. It looks more like a communion cloth to me, with a bit of tatting around it or a bit of lace around it, which I think is a very interesting image. I'm not entirely sure who this character is, and this person here. I mean, I'm presuming that this is Mary in the blue, but they've got a bag. I mean, one presumes that it's not going to be Judas, who of course was paid off with his 20 pieces of silver. So quite who this is. I mean, is it Mary Magdalene because of buying the precious perfume that she's carrying her purse with her? I don't know. Roger de Maistre has images in the Methodist art collection. Again, we're into that earlier 20th century, slightly angular, almost cubist images. You can see the cross, you can see the linens. The crown of thorns is sort of marked by a thorn tree, as well as what's on Jesus's head. Slightly confusing because Mary is shown in red with a blue headdress. There's a bit of a change in art, that in earlier art Mary is shown in red and then later in blue, particularly, and then Mary Magdalene tends to be put into red because of the supposed link to her being a prostitute, which is not at all proven. Just one of the popes thought it was a good idea. Well, I'll just read you a little bit about this because it takes a little bit of unpacking. You can see what it says on the right-hand side there. I won't hardly dare to pronounce his name, but and sometimes it's written one way around and sometimes the other. So Tomoyama Teiko, or often written as Teiko Tomoyana, called the Pieta of Gwangju. And you can see on the right-hand side, it's a lithograph referring to the bloody pro-democracy movement of Gwangju, an uprising in South Korea in May 1980, and opposition to United States. So we're after the Korean War, which was in the 50s, but then a point where they were wanting to assert their full independence. And if I just read the story. So in South Korea, President Park Chung-hee, who had been in power for 18 years in a military coup d'etat, was assassinated by his subordinates in 1979. And former President Park Geun-hye, his real daughter, came into power. And then in 18th of May 1980, in the southwestern city of Gwangju, demonstrations calling for democratization intensified, and the police were almost out of control. The police lost control. So the Gwangju uprising occurred when the South Korean army was put in because the police had lost control, and there were many casualties. And so the Pieta of Gwangju is highly regarded in South Korea as a work that conveys the tragedy of that time. I don't know whether Teiko Tomoyama has any Christian leanings, but he's obviously using the Christian image. Mary embracing her son with tears rolling down her cheek, and the back person, whoever that might be, could be Mary Magdalene, could be Joseph of Arimathea. The anguish of that person, that single image, is much more widely shared. Interestingly, it's been separated from the image of the actual Pieta of Mary with Jesus, and and is now used just on its own as an individual character in a lot of the images that show this. If you look up Kwangju and his name, you will find more often just the single image of that one character rather than the Christian image of the Pieta as well alongside it. It's a very stark image. It was in, as you can see, it's in the Christ We Share series that was done by the World Church back in the 1980s, early 1990s, can't remember exactly. I've resisted putting Martin Erspamer's work in. I have a whole book of his work with some meditation by Tim Radcliffe, who was in Oxford when Chris and I were there, and is still an active monk in Oxford. But I've not put the pictures in because I'm not sure that I like them. They're a bit too soft, a bit too, well, not saccharine exactly. If I just show you, can you see that? This is Jesus stripped of his garment. Sorry, it's quite small, I think, across here. It's almost a gentle image. There was no violence of him having the garments dragged off him. So I'm not entirely sure that I've appreciated it as a series of images. But I put this one in because I just thought this probably was kind of correct in showing the tenderness. If I just focus in a bit, Mary on this side, presumably Joseph of Arimathea on this side, and then the soldier is the one who is taking the body down, marks in the wrists and in the side of Jesus and in the feet, and the feet are still nailed. So somebody's got to do a bit of work there to complete it. But I thought this was the only point where I felt that the colour scheme and the imagery really did fit what was going on. And interestingly, has used the T-bar cross, which is probably more realistic than what we would traditionally call a cross with a crossbar on an upright. And then just coming to the end of this sequence, from the Stations of King Cross, we've got to Fountain, and Jesus is taken down from the cross. I love Mary's exaggerated halo, and if you remember this, he's done with cutout, so what is white was the remaining paper from a cutout and then put against the coloured background in order to give a photographic or a printed image. So that brings that sequence to an end of the taking down, the deposition, and we're going to move on now to the entombment. And again, the artists have portrayed this in many, many different ways. Starting with the work by Chris Shawcross, a little uncertain as to what's going on. And factually, one could argue that this is incorrect. So if I just bring it up a bit, because we have Jesus under the shroud, we have one of the women leaning against, and we have the pot of spices and the embalming fluids, which of course they get, the story is that they go on Sunday morning in order to do that, because they hadn't had time to do it on Friday night. They just put Jesus into the tomb and then went back later. So it's the one point when he's not following the strict sequence of the story. But on the other hand, I think he captures something in the image, which has got a certain realism to it, of the women's despair at what has happened. And it probably shows better in the right-hand picture because it's slightly in the left-hand picture. This arm coming down, I just direct you to, and we will come back to that later on, but it's that realism of an arm that is on a dead body, uncontrolled, and just has flopped down. And then if you look more closely, the Mary image has got her hand flat to the floor, but upturned, almost in sort of open, I don't know, supplication or waiting for something, or why. I mean, you can put various interpretations on what's being shown. The Forest Station's picture on the left-hand side is the full height picture. So this is as it is, and then I've tried to focus in a little bit. And oh, sorry, it's quite hard, I think, to exactly work out what we are being shown. I mean, you get the idea of the circle of the tomb, but there's other bits going on here as well. So down at the bottom here is the body under the shroud. At least that's my interpretation of what one can see. The rent that is mentioned in this fabric is kind of shown within the rending, the splitting of the wood. And then there is the sort of depth and a field. I mean, it's as though you're looking right back into a long and deep tomb, or else you're looking out to, which is equally possible, to the back of the stone. So it could be that we are. Oh, sorry, lost it. It could be that we're in the tomb, looking towards the door. Look up. Where is my book?
When that first came up, it looked to me just like a bodily organ.
Yes, it does a bit. Yeah. Yes, so the text is simply, he is enclosed into his tomb. It appears that the body grows smaller and smaller, changes and disappears. See it, smell it, hear it, sense it. And that's all that he says. So he doesn't give us much to go on in terms of what he's trying to illuminate there. But by contrast with most of his work, which is very smooth, planed surface, there's a degree of roughness about this, showing a sort of hacked out stone tomb. And then we get into this very simple image by Nicholas Markel. I didn't show one of the taking down on the cross because there isn't one. And I find it interesting, just the little touches in this. You remember, this has all been in black, white and red. But if I just focus in a bit, you've got the tomb, these two little arrows. I mean, they're pointing at the body, but there's also a sense of constraining, almost pinning the body into the tomb. And then if I come across, can you see? I think I can make it any bigger. A little sign of growth. So it's the sense of the seed going into the ground, and in some ways it's as if the whole tomb is a seed. And then, you know, the seed goes into the ground, which was the image that was used in the John 12 reading this Sunday yesterday. And the sense of new growth and hope that is there. I think the tiny touches that Nicholas Markel uses are incredibly powerful and simple, but very effective. Interestingly, this is called entombment, but is a direct sort of follow on from the earlier one of the deposition. There is no real sign of a tomb. The women are wrapping the body. So we've got the woman here wrapping the body, and here as well, and a woman weeping. So although it's called the entombment, it's more about the women preparing the body for burial. So you've got Joseph. Some texts will say that Nicodemus was there, so the two Christian focused Pharisees are part of this story. And then the three women, so Mary, Mary, and Mary, take your pick. Mary, the mother, probably on the right in the blue, and Mary Magdalene on the left. And of course, when we come to Easter morning, Salome is mentioned, so it could be that that's who's here. But if you can just look at the bottom, I don't know if I can, oh, sorry. I can make it bigger again. Just got that little hint of new growth. And interestingly, it's the new growth, the new plant that is directly under the head, where Jesus is being held by Nicodemus by Joseph of Arimathea. But the new growth is there even as he is laid to rest. Laurie Clark takes a very stark view of things. I mean, we said it a bit in the earlier picture of the deposition. Again, the women are present. We are inside the tomb looking out. And in this case, we've got dead trees just with a mere hint of new growth of a leaf maybe coming. But of course, that's how it is at the moment. I mean, if you think we're, 2 weeks away from, 10 days from Good Friday, we have stark trees. We aren't yet in leaf here. And I think that Eulalia Clark is picking up on that whole notion of the death of winter and the possibility of new birth in spring. The very emaciated hand, it's almost like a skeleton already, as if the transition is already taking place. And Good also takes the image on the inside, so you have the body laid in the tomb. There's a slight resemblance, I think, to Turin shroud image, and the fact that the face is almost imprinted onto the shroud. You've got the golden crown, golden halo coming through together. Can you see the cutout in the floor? So he's using that image as we would use of a burial into the ground, rather than most images will show a body laid on a shelf within a stone cut tomb. And then the round stone over the entrance, and just a tiny hint of light above it. There is light at the end of the tunnel, I suppose, literally, figuratively shown in that image. It's interesting how you have here the body being laid out and prayers being said. So there is a degree of spiritual reverence in the body being entombed. I mean, a hint at the overall tomb in the arch behind. I don't know whether these images, these symbols, have got any particular meaning. I mean, if you look on this side, you've possibly got angels or people kneeling to pray. But certainly, it seems to me that this is almost like a high altar, and a priest behind the altar, and people in prayer as the body is laid out. And of course, a hint of Calvary with the cross in the background. But again, the signs of new life in the little trees that appear. And the colour has changed, hasn't it? We looked at the purples on the deposition, and now we're beginning to move into the reds. And I thought Peter Clark would appreciate this, because you can't get much more abstract than that, can you, for the entombment, Jesus in the sepulchre. So just a simple box. Another Jonathan Hutchins. Again, I'm not entirely sure what's in the artist's mind, but it's the look of intenseness from the person on the right here. I mean, I'm presuming this is the male character, so is it Joseph? But looking down onto Jesus, and one of the Marys, her arm under his head, just in embrace. But it's a slightly spooky picture, because they are themselves. I mean, Jesus is the one with colour in his cheeks, going back to what Helen said earlier, though, whereas the other two are the ones who have, the colour has almost drained out of them, which is probably true in the sense of the shock and the sorrow of it all. These two stark black and white images on the left-hand side, Margaret Adams Parker's image. So Mary still holding her son by his head, and I'm presuming Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus being the men on the left-hand side. And again, I mean, laying down, if you just make it bigger, there is just the hint of the tomb under, or the catafalque underneath the arm as Jesus is being laid out. And this one, I think, is probably one of the Noise K parts that I like, as against the ones that I found it interesting to look at, because it's all going on here. You have in the background Jesus being carried into the tomb. If you remember, we've spoken before how those figures were in the back of the picture, and indeed on one of them that we looked at last week, it almost was if two men were carrying a stretcher, perhaps coming to collect Jesus. So they are taking Jesus into the tomb, and then the women have already turned away. It's too much to take in, too much to see. The cross, the empty cross, is here on the right-hand side. A child, many of his pictures have had a child in. And then that, was it a vine, is now very much a little rose. And so we have a rose as part of the symbol of resurrection, or resurrection hope, coming into the image. And that hint of new life beyond the death. And as we've gone round the circle line, we have at last arrived at King's Cross, and Jesus being bodily carried into the tomb by Joseph and Mary, standing behind and looking on. Again, that lifeless body, in that the arm is hanging down, the hair is hanging down, and the angularity of it. As we come towards the end of these images, James Tissot, we looked at two or three of his images last week of crucifixion. I mean, this is a mix of all sorts of things going on. So we've got the body carried on a stretcher, four men, so presumably Joseph and Nicodemus at the front, which is Mary, which is which Mary, but the women of Jerusalem following on behind, and a soldier taking part. Of course, we've got the soldier who at the tomb, as the cross is taken down, saying, "This truly is the Son of God." So that moment of conversion. So the soldier has now picked up the body, whereas otherwise the soldiers would have just left them to the families or to rot. and being carried down into a tomb. But this is a very shaped tomb. I mean, it's not just a hole in the ground. It's almost like the entrance to a mausoleum, or it's shaped stone, finished stone. You can imagine a proper door being there rather than a rolled stone in front of it. There's just a little hint of the city walls. Can you see at the top here? So the battlements of the city walls. And they're coming down very, very obvious steps. And I think my guess is, and this is only a guess, that he's probably found a place in Israel outside the city wall of Jerusalem, on the Kidron Valley side. So the way that Jesus came into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, across the valley there are large Jewish cemeteries, because Jews, even when they weren't living in Jerusalem, would want to be taken back to the holy city, and obviously couldn't be buried in the city itself. So they're buried huge cemeteries on the hillside facing across to the city walls. And my guess is that James Tissot has actually been there and done his sketches in situ, of trying to look at what's there in terms of open tombs. And actually slightly down the valley, there are some quite, well, I'm going to say ancient tombs, but they're not incredibly old. They're older than the time of Jesus. They're probably 100 or 200 years before Jesus. And we think that that's where Jesus was referring to the whited sepulchre. You remember the little phrase that he uses of the whitened tomb. So the tombs would have been whitewashed so that they stood out in the landscape. And the thought is that those tombs down the Kidron Valley were the whitest sepulchre that he alludes to. And then I come back to this image. I shared this image with you in 2020. Christine wrote some meditations in the midst of COVID and lockdown. And we're going to use one of those in a minute to finish this sequence tonight. But Hans Holbein's picture is they're not entirely sure, but they think it was probably part of a piece that sat above an altar, possibly had other paintings above it as a triptych. So it would have probably shown a whole sequence of events of a crucifixion. But this is one of the starkest images of Christ in the tomb, or you might say in a coffin. So it's more, as you might expect, a body to be laid out in a coffin. But it's very interesting, and a number of the commentators refer to the different things that you can see. So you obviously have the marks in the hand and in the side. The arm is sort of laying flat, as you would expect in a dead body, but the finger is stretched out, and some say that is what's the word? Imitating, if you like, the symbol of the Sistine Chapel, where Adam is receiving the spark of life from God. So is it that he's pointing to the future, to the fact that he will live again? It's obviously quite a deliberate image that's been used. And the hair, which sort of flops down and gives a certain realism to it. But the body is not wrapped, so we're not into the full story of the body being wrapped in the strips of cloth and laid into the tomb. Now, I always do find it slightly interesting when you look at some of these images that you reference back the swaddling cloths of birth. Jesus was wrapped in swaddling cloths and laid in a manger, and at the end wrapped in a linen cloth and laid in the tomb. And maybe that allusion is we don't pick up on as much as we should, because it's almost that Jesus has gone full circle and will be born again, to use his language about Nicodemus, that Easter Day is a rebirth, a new life. And so I think in a way, Holbein is sort of back referencing those things. If you wonder, I mean, you can probably tell if you know any small amount, or even if you don't. So at the top it says Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. So it's the words that were nailed on top of the cross. So Chris, if you're ready, would you like to just say a little bit about what you're going to read and its background, and then read it, and I'll put the words up.
Well, this was written sort of right in the middle of the first lockdown, when we were all feeling in quite a state of limbo, if I can use that phrase, and reflecting on that, particularly on Holy Saturday, which is a great time of waiting, when everything seems to be in suspended animation. So it is very much reflecting on that lockdown time, but I'm sure we all have times in our life when we're in limbo, waiting for things to happen and feeling very unsettled. So this is a reflection on that. After the sound and fury comes the silence. After the work of Christ is done, the Lord of life sleeps. After the suffering comes soothing death. After the glory of the cross comes the anonymity of the tomb. This is such a quiet time, Lord. Wrap me up in its quietness as I contemplate your Son, wrapped in his grave clothes, waiting in his tomb for your victory to be revealed. This is such a quiet time for us all, Lord, a time of aloneness and helplessness, a time when everyday life is a waiting game, bound hard by restrictions, anxiety, and sorrow. Lord, I bring to you in prayer today all those who are waiting for news, for diagnosis, for treatment, waiting for healing or release, waiting for life to get back to normal. Lord, I know that you wait alongside us, and today I wait too, with Christ, waiting for the new life, hope, and joy I know that tomorrow will bring.
As Chris said, that was written particularly in that COVID time, and that time of quietness. The world went quiet, didn't it? That time of feeling shut in and constrained. It's almost as if we were in a tomb in our houses, only let out for a short time in the day. But I think it isn't an unreal thing to relate that to where we are now. I always think as we go through Lent, it is a quieter time. At times it feels intensely busy, but you know what I mean? It's a more reflective time. And all of us at different points in our life, because of what's happening around us, have that sense of being constrained and enclosed and shut in, and waiting for things to move on. And I think as we get to this point of Passiontide, so Passiontide started yesterday, we've got a 2-week run up now, which will lead us next week to Palm Sunday, and then so rapidly through Holy Week, Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, Easter Day, coming one on top of the other. And I don't know about you and how you're feeling at the moment, but Chris and I have just been saying, well, we've just got to get our heads down to Easter, and then the weight will come off a bit, and we'll have a bit more time to think and a bit more time to be. And it's partly the pressure of church things, it's partly where we are in our own lives. It's partly just the fact that the busyness is so at the moment, and you look to those days beyond Easter when hopefully it'll be a little quieter and a bit more time for reflection and to be oneself. So although that is written of a particular time, and you have to reference that because it doesn't make sense otherwise, that whole sense of quietness and waiting, I think, is not just the picture of Christ in the tomb, but often where we are in our own lives. I'm just going to stop recording and we'll come back together.